I discovered my father's secret bank account with $2 million and withdrawal records showing he'd been paying blackmail for 15 years. I wasn't supposed to find it. Dad had been in the hospital for 3 weeks after his heart attack, and Mom asked me to handle his finances while he recovered. I'd always known him as a careful man, balancing checkbooks to the penny, clipping coupons, lecturing us about turning off lights to save electricity. So when I logged into his bank account and saw $2,347,191.42 sitting in a savings account I'd never heard of, my stomach dropped. But it wasn't the money that made my hands shake. It was the withdrawal history. Every month for the past 15 years, like clockwork, $8,000. Always on the third Thursday, always to the same account number, always with the same memo, monthly consulting fee. I scrolled back through years of records. The payment started in March 2009, right after my little brother died in that car accident. The same month our family fell apart. Dad had always told us the insurance settlement wasn't much, just enough to cover funeral costs and a small college fund for me. We lived modestly, drove old cars, shopped at thrift stores. I worked 2 jobs through college because Dad said money was tight. Meanwhile, he'd been sitting on over $2 million and paying someone $8,000 every month for consulting. I called the bank. After convincing them I was authorized on the account, the representative confirmed what I already knew. Automatic monthly transfers to AM Holdings LLC. No other details available. That night, I confronted Mom. She was washing dishes when I slid the bank statements across the kitchen counter. "What is this?" I asked. Her face went white. The plate she was holding slipped from her hands and shattered on the floor. She stared at the broken pieces like they represented our entire family. "Where did you get these?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Dad's been paying someone $8,000 a month for 15 years, the same 15 years since Brian died. What happened that night, Mom?" She sank into a chair, suddenly looking decades older. Her hands trembled as she reached for the papers. "Your father wasn't supposed to drive that night," she said. "He'd been drinking at his company's Christmas party. I begged him to call a cab. I practically got on my knees. My blood turned cold." "Mom, what are you saying?" "Brian wanted to go to that midnight movie premiere. Your father insisted on driving him and his friends." Her voice cracked. "The police report said the other driver ran the red light, hit them head on." I felt sick. "But that's not what happened, is it?" She looked at me with hollow eyes that had seen too much pain. "The other driver, Alex Morrison, he wasn't supposed to be there either. He was running from something that night, something your father knew about." "What did Dad know?" Mom stood up slowly, walked to our old filing cabinet, and pulled out a manila folder I'd never seen before. Her hands shook as she handed it to me. Inside were photos, bank records, police reports with sections blacked out, and a letter typed on law firm letterhead. The letter was dated 1 week after Brian's funeral. It was addressed to my father and signed by someone named Adrian Morrison. "Mr. Patterson," it read, "as we discussed, my client is prepared to maintain silence regarding the events of December 18th, 2009, in exchange for the monthly consideration we agreed upon. Any deviation from this arrangement will result in the immediate release of all materials to the appropriate authorities." I stared at the signature. "Morrison, like the other driver?" Mom nodded, her face etched with 15 years of buried pain. "His sister, she's a lawyer." "Mom, what is she talking about? What silence? What materials?" My mother closed her eyes, as if the words physically hurt to speak. "Alex Morrison was fleeing a hit and run when he crashed into your brother's car. He'd just killed a pedestrian downtown and was racing to get rid of the evidence. So why was Dad being blackmailed?" "Because," she whispered, "your father saw him do it." The room started spinning. "What?" "Your father was walking back to his car after the Christmas party. He saw Alex Morrison hit that pedestrian, saw him speed away without stopping. Your father got the license plate number, even took a photo with his phone. Then why didn't he call the police right away?" Mom's voice broke completely. "He tried to, but by the time he got to his phone and started dialing, Alex had already crashed into Brian's car 6 blocks away. Your father had to choose, give his statement about the hit and run or rush to save his own son." I felt like I was going to throw up. "He chose Brian, but Brian was already gone," Mom said, tears streaming down her face. "The impact killed him instantly, along with his 2 friends, Tommy Rodriguez and Michael Kim. Your father performed CPR until paramedics arrived, but it was too late. All 3 boys died at the scene, and Alex Morrison was unconscious, barely alive, trapped in his car. The names hit me like punches. Tommy and Michael had been Brian's best friends since elementary school. I remembered their funerals, their devastated parents, the way our entire community had mourned. So Dad never told anyone what he saw? Not at first. He was in shock, grieving. The police questioned him about the accident, but he only told them about Brian's crash. He said he'd deal with what he witnessed downtown later after the funeral, after we'd had time to process losing our son. I looked back at the photos in the folder. Traffic camera stills showing Dad's car in the downtown area. Timestamps proving he was there when the pedestrian was hit. Screenshots from his phone showing the photo he'd taken of Morrison's license plate. "But then Adrian Morrison showed up at our house the day after Brian's funeral," Mom continued. "She'd done her research. She knew your father had been at that Christmas party, knew he'd been drinking, knew he'd driven Brian and his friends home afterward. The pieces were starting to come together, and I felt sick. She had evidence that your father was driving drunk that night," Mom said. "Security footage from the restaurant parking lot showing him stumbling to his car. Breathalyzer results from the hospital after the accident showing his blood alcohol was 0.09, just over the legal limit. She said if he reported what Alex did, she'd make sure everyone knew that your father was the real killer, that he was a drunk driver who murdered his own son and 2 innocent children. The words hit me like physical blows. But that's not true. The other driver ran the red light. Doesn't matter, Mom said. She had lawyers, money, connections. She convinced your father that no one would believe him, that even if they did, he'd still be charged with vehicular manslaughter for driving drunk with minors in the car. She painted a picture of what our lives would become. Your father in prison, our family destroyed, you growing up knowing your dad killed your brother. I thought about all the years Dad couldn't look me in the eye when we talked about Brian, how he'd leave the room whenever someone mentioned the accident, how he'd started drinking more, staying late at the office, disappearing for hours without explanation, the way he'd aged 10 years in the months after Brian died. So Alex Morrison got away with murder? Mom nodded. The pedestrian he killed was a homeless man named David Chen, a 42-year-old veteran with PTSD who'd been living on the streets since his discharge from Afghanistan. He'd been trying to get clean, attending AA meetings, staying at the shelter downtown. No family to speak for him, no one to advocate for justice. The case went cold within weeks. And Dad's been paying to keep quiet about witnessing it? Adrienne Morrison made it crystal clear that if the payment stopped, she'd release everything. The traffic camera footage, the restaurant security video, medical records showing your father's blood alcohol level from the hospital that night, testimony about his erratic behavior in the weeks after the accident. She said she'd destroy our family's reputation and make sure your father went to prison for vehicular manslaughter. I felt a rage building inside me that I'd never experienced before. So we lived like paupers while this woman got rich off Brian's death? Your father wanted to tell you the truth when you turned 18, then when you graduated college, then when you got engaged. But every time he tried, he'd imagine you hating him for choosing to protect himself instead of getting justice for a stranger. He was terrified you'd see him the way he saw himself, as a coward who let a killer go free to save his own skin. The weight of it all was crushing. 15 years of guilt, shame, and financial strain, all because one woman decided to profit from tragedy. What about the insurance money? The settlement? Mom laughed bitterly. There was no settlement. The insurance company fought us every step of the way, claimed your father's drinking contributed to the accident. We got $50,000 total, barely enough to cover the funeral costs for 3 boys. Everything else, every penny we lived on, came from your father's salary and that secret account. Where did the $2 million come from originally? Your grandfather's life insurance policy. He died 6 months before Brian, left everything to your father. We were going to use it to pay off the house, maybe buy you a car for college. Instead, it became our prison sentence. I spent the next week diving deeper into the research. I found articles about David Chen in the local paper, small mentions of a homeless veteran found dead on East Randolph Street, hit-and-run driver never found. There was a brief interview with a social worker at the shelter who described him as quiet, kind, working hard to get his life back together. David was one of our success stories, the social worker had said. He'd been clean for 3 months, had a job interview lined up the next week. Such a senseless tragedy. I tracked down Detective Raymond Torres, the original investigating officer on David Chen's case. He was retired now, living in a small house on the south side, but his memory of the case was sharp. "Mr. Patterson," he said when I called, "I remember your family's tragedy. Lost 3 boys in one night. I'm sorry for your loss. Detective, I have information about the David Chen case, the hit and run from December 18th, 2009. There was a long pause. I'm listening." I told him everything. About Dad's witness account, about Adrienne Morrison's blackmail scheme, about the evidence she'd buried to protect her brother. When I finished, Detective Torres was quiet for a long moment. "Son, I've been carrying that case with me for 15 years. It was my first year as lead detective, and I knew something was off. The timing, the location, the way the investigation just died, it never sat right with me. Can you reopen it? With this evidence? Absolutely. The statute of limitations doesn't apply when new evidence emerges, especially for vehicular manslaughter. And this blackmail scheme? That's extortion, tax evasion, obstruction of justice. We're looking at federal charges." He leaned back in his chair. "Your father's been carrying this burden for 15 years. Are you sure he's ready for what comes next? The media attention, the investigation, the trial? Morrison's going to come at him with everything she's got." "He's dying," I said. "The stress of keeping this secret has been killing him slowly. His heart attack wasn't his first. He's had 3 in the past 2 years. I think he'd rather face the consequences than carry this guilt to his grave." Torres nodded. "Okay, but we need to be strategic. Adrienne Morrison is connected, powerful. She's got judges, prosecutors, politicians in her pocket. If we're going to take her down, we need to do it right." He outlined a plan. We'd need recorded evidence of Morrison admitting to the blackmail scheme. We'd need to coordinate with the IRS and the district attorney's office. We'd need to prepare for Morrison to attack Dad's credibility, his character, his memory. "She's been getting away with this for 15 years, Torres said. "She won't go down quietly. She'll try to destroy your father before she lets him destroy her." The next step was reaching out to David Chen's family. It took some digging, but I found his sister Maria living in Sacramento. She was a social worker, married with 2 kids, active in veteran advocacy groups. When I called her, she broke down completely. "I've been waiting 15 years to learn what happened to my brother," she said through tears. "I knew the police investigation was incomplete. David was careful, smart. He wouldn't have just walked into traffic. Someone hit him and left him to die. I'm sorry it took so long for the truth to come out." Don't apologize. You're giving me something the police never could. Answers and justice. Maria flew out the next week. Meeting her was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. She looked like David. Same gentle eyes, same quiet smile. She brought photos of him in his army uniform, letters he'd written from Afghanistan, drawings he'd made during his recovery at the VA hospital. David struggled with PTSD, but he was getting better, she told me as we sat in a coffee shop near the hospital. He'd been clean for 3 months, had a job interview lined up at a construction company. He was talking about getting his own apartment, maybe starting to date again. I'm so sorry for what my family's silence cost yours. Maria reached across the table and took my hand. Your father was terrorized by a predator. Don't blame him for her crimes. That afternoon, I took Maria to the hospital to meet Dad. He was propped up in bed, looking frail but determined. When I introduced them, he immediately started crying. I'm so sorry, he said. I failed your brother. I failed you. I let his killer go free because I was a coward. Maria sat down beside his bed. Tell me about that night. For the next hour, Dad recounted everything he'd witnessed. How he'd seen Alex Morrison's car strike David. How he'd watched Morrison speed away without stopping. How he'd tried to help David but arrived too late. I should have called 911 immediately, Dad said. Instead, I called your mother, told her what I'd seen, asked her what to do. While I was wasting time, Alex Morrison was crashing into my son's car. You were in shock, Maria said gently. You just witnessed a terrible crime. No one thinks clearly in moments like that. But if I'd acted faster, if I'd made the call right away, maybe the police could have stopped Morrison before he reached Brian's car. Maria shook her head. The police report shows the crashes happened only 6 minutes apart. There's no way they could have caught him in time. Your son's death wasn't your fault. Dad broke down completely. I've been living with this guilt for 15 years. Every day, I wondered if Brian would still be alive if I'd done things differently. He wouldn't be, Maria said firmly. Alex Morrison was drunk, high on cocaine, fleeing a crime scene. He was going to crash into someone that night. The only difference is that someone happened to be your son. Over the next few days, we prepared our case against Adrian Morrison. Detective Torres introduced me to Assistant District Attorney Helen Rodriguez, a tough prosecutor who specialized in corruption cases. She was in her 50s, sharp as a razor, with a reputation for taking down powerful defendants. This is a prosecutor's dream, Rodriguez said after reviewing all the evidence. Clear evidence of extortion, tax evasion, and obstruction of justice. Plus, she's been profiting off a murder cover-up for 15 years. No jury is going to have sympathy for her. But Rodriguez also warned me about Morrison's likely defense strategy. She's going to argue that your father was the real criminal, that he was drunk, that he caused the accident, that he's trying to shift blame to avoid responsibility. She'll paint him as an unreliable witness with a motive to lie, but we have his photo of Morrison's license plate, time-stamped from that night, which she'll claim could have been taken any time. She'll say your father followed her brother to steal his identity, stage his own accident, cover up his own crimes. Rodriguez pulled out Morrison's file. She'd been researching her for years. Adrian Morrison is smart, ruthless, and connected. She's represented 3 judges, 2 city council members, and the mayor's chief of staff. She knows where all the bodies are buried in this city. So what's our strategy? We go for the financial crimes first. Tax evasion, money laundering, crimes that don't require a jury to believe your father's account of that night. Once we've got her on the federal charges, we use that leverage to get her to confess to the extortion. The plan was complex but necessary. The IRS had been investigating AM Holdings LLC for months, ever since I'd tipped them off about the unreported income. They'd traced the money through shell companies, offshore accounts, fake business expenses. She's been sophisticated about it, the IRS investigator told us. But sophisticated criminals make sophisticated mistakes. She's got 15 years of financial records that don't add up. While the federal case was building, Torres and I worked on gathering evidence about the blackmail scheme. We interviewed the hospital staff who'd treated Dad after Brian's accident, documenting his blood alcohol level and emotional state. We pulled security footage from the restaurant where the Christmas party had been held. Most importantly, we prepared to confront Morrison directly. The plan was simple, but risky. I would go to Morrison's office wearing a wire provided by the district attorney's office. If I could get her to admit to the blackmail scheme on tape, we'd have everything we needed for a conviction. Remember, Rodriguez coached me, you're not a law enforcement officer. You're a private citizen having a conversation. Anything she says voluntarily is admissible in court. What if she gets suspicious? She's been doing this for 15 years. She's arrogant, overconfident. In her mind, your family belongs to her. She won't be able to resist gloating. Torres fitted me with a wire, a tiny recording device hidden in my shirt button. This thing will pick up every word, he said. Just get her talking and let her hang herself. On Thursday morning, I put on my best suit and drove downtown to Morrison's law office. The building was sleek and modern, 30 floors of glass and steel paid for with blood money. Morrison's firm occupied the entire 28th floor. I'd like to speak with Ms. Morrison about the Patterson account, I told the receptionist, a young woman who looked fresh out of college. The receptionist's demeanor changed instantly. She'd obviously been briefed on how to handle anything related to my family. One moment, please. She made a quick phone call, then led me down a hallway lined with awards and photographs. Morrison's office was at the end, corner suite with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Adrienne Morrison was smaller than I'd imagined, but carried herself with the confidence of someone who'd never faced real consequences. She was impeccably dressed in a designer suit, her silver hair perfectly styled, her makeup flawless despite being nearly 60. "You must be Brian's brother," she said without standing up or offering to shake hands. "I heard about your father's condition. Terrible thing watching a parent deteriorate. I trust the account transfer will continue without interruption during his incapacitation." The casual way she mentioned Brian's name, like he was just a line item in her business ledger, made my blood boil, but I forced myself to remain calm. "Actually," I said, settling into the chair across from her massive mahogany desk, "I'm here to discuss a new arrangement." She leaned back in her leather chair, interlocking her perfectly manicured fingers. "Oh? I wasn't aware our current arrangement had any flexibility." I pulled out a folder. Not the real evidence, just copies designed to get her talking. "See, while managing my father's finances during his illness, I've become curious about the nature of your consulting work. 15 years is quite a long business relationship. Your services must be extraordinarily valuable." Morrison smiled, the practiced smile of a predator who thought she was still in control. "Your father and I have what you might call a symbiotic relationship. I provide certain protections for your family's reputation and financial security. In return, he compensates me appropriately for my discretion and expertise." The wire was capturing every word. "Protections from what, exactly?" Her smile widened, revealing perfectly capped teeth. "From the truth about what really happened the night your brother died. From the consequences of your father's poor judgment and reckless behavior." "Which consequences would those be?" Morrison stood up and walked to her window, gazing out at the city skyline like a queen surveying her kingdom. "Criminal charges for vehicular manslaughter, civil liability for wrongful death, public humiliation when everyone learns that Robert Patterson killed his own son and 2 innocent children because he was too drunk and too proud to call a cab." I forced myself to keep my voice steady. "But according to the police report, the other driver ran a red light." Morrison laughed, a cold, calculated sound that made my skin crawl. "Police reports can be incomplete, especially when certain witnesses choose not to come forward with relevant information that might complicate the narrative." "What kind of information?" She turned back to face me, her eyes gleaming with sadistic pleasure. "Your father witnessed my brother Alex's unfortunate encounter with that homeless man earlier that evening. A tragic accident, really. Alex was distraught, not thinking clearly after an argument with his ex-wife. But instead of doing his civic duty and reporting it immediately, your father chose to prioritize his own family's crisis. So you blackmailed him." Morrison returned to her desk and sat down, her expression shifting to mock concern. "I prefer to think of it as offering him a choice. He could face the consequences of his own criminal actions, driving while intoxicated with minors in his vehicle, failing to report a crime, obstruction of justice, or he could compensate me for my discretion and legal expertise." The admission was perfect, clear, unambiguous, recorded in high definition. "And if he'd refused to pay?" Morrison shrugged as if discussing the weather. "Then everyone would have learned the truth. About his drinking problem, about his negligence, about how his selfish decision to drive drunk killed 3 children. His reputation would have been destroyed, his career ruined, his freedom forfeited. For 15 years, as long as necessary, your father took something from my family that night, my brother's future, his cognitive abilities, his chance at a normal life. Fair compensation seemed appropriate. Even though your brother killed someone?" Morrison's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the cold calculation underneath. "Alex made a mistake, a momentary lapse in judgment. Your father made a choice to prioritize his own interests over justice. There's a difference." I stood up slowly. "That's interesting, because I've been recording this entire conversation." Her face went from confident to confused to terrified in the span of 3 seconds. "You can't, that's illegal." "Actually, it's not. In Illinois, only one party needs to consent to recording. I consented." I pulled out my phone and stopped the recording app, though the real wire was still running. 16 minutes of you admitting to 15 years of extortion, tax evasion, and obstruction of justice. The district attorney is going to love this." Morrison lunged for her desk phone, but I was already walking toward the door. "Oh, and Adrienne, the homeless man your brother killed? David Chen was a veteran who served 2 tours in Afghanistan. He had a Purple Heart and a Bronze Star. The veteran community takes care of their own, and they've been looking for his killer for 15 years. I paused at the door and turned back. "Detective Raymond Torres sends his regards." He never forgot about David Chen. Neither did his sister Maria, who's flying in from California to finally get justice for her brother. Morrison's face had gone from white to green. "This is entrapment. You can't use this recording." "I can, and I will. You have about 30 minutes before the police arrive with arrest warrants. I'd suggest you call your lawyer." I left her office and took the elevator down to the lobby, where Detective Torres and 2 FBI agents were waiting. "How did it go?" Torres asked. I handed him the recording device. "She confessed to everything. Blackmail, extortion, obstruction of justice, even admitted her brother killed David Chen." Torres grinned, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him. 15 years I've been waiting for this moment. 2 hours later, Adrienne Morrison was arrested at her law office as she tried to flee through the parking garage. The charges were extensive: extortion, tax evasion, money laundering, conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and accessory after the fact to vehicular manslaughter. The story broke on the evening news. prominent attorney arrested in 15-year blackmail scheme. I drove straight to the hospital to tell Dad. He was propped up in bed looking more alert than he had in weeks. "It's over," I said. Tears rolled down his cheeks. "What happens now?" "Now you tell the truth. Detective Torres wants your full statement about what you witnessed that night. The district attorney wants to interview you about Morrison's threats, and Maria Chen wants to finally understand what happened to her brother." Dad nodded slowly. "I'm ready. I should have been ready 15 years ago." The next morning, Detective Torres came to Dad's hospital room with a video camera and a court reporter. For 4 hours, Dad told the entire story, every detail he'd buried, every threat Morrison had made, every sleepless night he'd endured. "I know what I did was wrong," he said, his voice weak but steady. "I should have called the police immediately after witnessing the hit and run. I should have put justice for David Chen above my own fears. But when I heard about Brian's accident, when I saw his car wrapped around that tree, I couldn't think about anything except trying to save my son." Detective Torres leaned forward. "Mr. Patterson, you were a father who just witnessed a horrific crime and then learned your own child was dying. Your reaction was human, understandable. What Adrienne Morrison did to you afterward was criminal." The media coverage was intense but largely sympathetic. The story of a grieving father terrorized by a corrupt lawyer resonated with people across the country. Editorial writers condemned Morrison's predatory behavior. Victim advocacy groups rallied around our family, but Morrison's defense team fought back hard. They held press conferences painting Dad as a drunk driver trying to escape responsibility. They leaked selected portions of his hospital records, highlighting his blood alcohol level from the night of the accident. "Robert Patterson is a criminal who's been hiding behind his grief for 15 years, Morrison's lead attorney told reporters. "Now he's trying to shift blame to an innocent woman who's dedicated her life to helping victims." The character assassination was brutal, but predictable. What I hadn't expected was how it would affect our community. Brian's friend's parents started avoiding us. Former neighbors crossed the street when they saw me coming. The local paper ran letters to the editor questioning Dad's version of events. "Let them talk," Maria Chen told me when I called her, frustrated and angry. "They don't know what it's like to lose someone and then be terrorized for 15 years. They don't understand how predators work." Maria had become our strongest advocate. She gave interviews about her brother, about his service in Afghanistan, about the 15 years she'd spent wondering what happened to him. "David was a good man who deserved justice," she said on the evening news. "If Robert Patterson had come forward immediately, my brother's killer would have been caught that night. But Robert was terrorized into silence by a woman who profited from my brother's murder." The legal proceedings moved faster than expected. The federal tax evasion charges were airtight. Morrison had failed to report over $1.4 million in income over 15 years. The money laundering charges were supported by a paper trail showing how she'd moved the blackmail payments through shell companies and offshore accounts. But the extortion charges required the jury to believe Dad's testimony, and Morrison's lawyers attacked his credibility relentlessly. "Robert Patterson has been lying for 15 years, Morrison's attorney argued during opening statements. "He's an alcoholic who killed 3 children and spent 15 years constructing an elaborate fantasy to avoid responsibility." Rodriguez countered with the recording of Morrison's confession. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you don't have to take Robert Patterson's word for what happened. You can hear Adrienne Morrison's own words, her own admission of guilt, her own description of 15 years of criminal extortion." The recording was devastating. Even with the defense's attempts to discredit it, Morrison's voice was clear, her admissions unambiguous. She'd confessed to blackmail, extortion, and covering up her brother's crime. But the most powerful moment came when Maria Chen testified about the impact of Morrison's crimes on her family. "For 15 years I've lived with questions," she said from the witness stand. "What happened to my brother? Why did someone leave him to die on that street? Why didn't anyone care enough to find his killer?" She looked directly at Morrison, who sat stone-faced at the defense table. "Now I know. David's killer was protected by his sister, who turned my brother's murder into a profit center. She didn't just steal money from the Patterson family. She stole my family's right to justice." Dad's testimony took 2 days. He was in a wheelchair by then, tethered to an oxygen tank, but his voice was strong and clear as he recounted the events of that night. "I made terrible mistakes," he said from the witness stand. "I should have called the police immediately after witnessing the hit and run. I should have put David Chen's life above my own fears. But my mistakes don't excuse 15 years of extortion." He looked directly at Morrison. "Adrienne Morrison didn't just steal my money. She stole my family's peace, my relationship with my surviving son, my ability to grieve properly for my child. She turned my worst moment into her greatest opportunity." The cross-examination was brutal. Morrison's lawyers grilled Dad about his drinking, his decision-making, his reliability as a witness. They suggested he was fabricating the entire story to avoid prosecution for vehicular manslaughter. "Isn't it true, Mr. Patterson, that you killed your own son and are now trying to blame an innocent woman?" Dad's voice never wavered. "No. My son was killed by Alex Morrison, who was fleeing a hit-and-run crime when he crashed into Brian's car. His sister has been profiting from that crime ever since." The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the 4 women stood and read the verdict. Guilty on all counts. Morrison showed no emotion as the verdicts were read, but I saw her hands shaking as the judge scheduled sentencing for the following month. During the sentencing hearing, Rodriguez presented evidence of Morrison's lavish lifestyle, funded by our family's suffering. Photos of her vacation homes, her expensive cars, her art collection, all purchased with blood money. Adrienne Morrison didn't just commit extortion, Rodriguez told the judge. She committed 15 years of psychological torture against a grieving family. She turned their tragedy into her treasure. The judge sentenced Morrison to 15 years in federal prison and ordered her to pay restitution of $144 million, every penny she'd stolen from our family, plus interest and penalties. Ms. Morrison, the judge said before imposing sentence, you perverted the practice of law and profited from murder. You showed no mercy to your victims, and this court will show no mercy to you. Alex Morrison had died in his care facility during the trial, never knowing that his crime had finally been exposed. Some might call that mercy. Others might say he finally faced his own judgment. The veteran community embraced our family completely after the verdict. They organized a memorial service for David Chen, attended by hundreds of people who'd never known him, but honored his service and mourned his loss. Dad insisted on speaking at the service despite his deteriorating condition. David Chen served his country with honor in Afghanistan, he said from his wheelchair, his voice amplified by microphone. He survived war only to be killed by a coward on a city street. His death was compounded by 15 years of injustice, 15 years of his killer being protected while his family suffered without answers. He looked out at the crowd of veterans, their families, and supporters. I failed David Chen that night by not calling the police immediately. I failed his family by allowing fear to silence me for 15 years. But today, we can finally say his name, honor his service, and ensure his sacrifice is remembered. The VFW named their homeless outreach program in David Chen's honor. Maria established a foundation to help homeless veterans find housing and mental health services. She used the media attention from the trial to raise awareness about veteran homelessness and PTSD. David's death had to mean something, she told me at the memorial service. Now it does. Dad lived for 14 more months after the trial, long enough to see the David Chen Memorial Fund reach $2 million in donations, long enough to cut the ribbon at the new David Chen Veterans Housing Complex, long enough to walk me down the aisle at my wedding, well, wheel me down the aisle while on oxygen, long enough to meet his first grandchild, whom I named David Chen Patterson in honor of the man whose justice Dad had finally helped secure. I can die with a clear conscience now, Dad told me the day before he passed. David Chen's family has answers. Morrison is in prison. The truth is finally free. He died peacefully in his sleep, holding a photo of Brian and surrounded by family who finally understood the burden he'd carried. I used Morrison's restitution money to expand the David Chen Memorial Fund and establish the Chen Patterson Legal Clinic, providing free legal services to families dealing with wrongful death cases and victims of criminal extortion. The clinic is housed in a renovated building downtown, just 6 blocks from where David Chen was killed. His photo hangs in the lobby, along with photos of Brian, Tommy Rodriguez, and Michael Kim, all victims of Alex Morrison's crimes. A plaque in the waiting room reads, "Justice delayed is not justice denied. Truth withheld does not become truth destroyed." Sometimes clients ask me why I chose to specialize in victim advocacy. I tell them about Brian, about Dad, about 15 years of buried truth and the predator who profited from our pain. I tell them that secrets are like cancer. They grow in darkness and consume everything healthy around them. I think about the night Brian died often, about the impossible choices we make in moments of panic, about how one decision can haunt a family for generations, especially when predators smell blood in the water and move in for the kill. But mostly, I think about the courage it took for Dad to finally tell the truth, about Maria Chen's grace in forgiving him, about Detective Torres' dedication to a case that haunted him for 15 years, and about the knowledge that sometimes, even after 15 years of injustice, the right choice is still the right choice. Adrienne Morrison is serving her sentence at a federal prison in Ohio. Her appeals have all been denied. Her law license was permanently revoked. Her assets were seized to pay restitution to our family and taxes to the government. She'll be 74 when she's released, with no career, no money, and no legacy except the damage she caused. I hope she spends every day of those 15 years thinking about David Chen and the family that never got to say goodbye. I hope she thinks about Brian, Tommy, and Michael, 3 boys who died because her brother was fleeing the scene of her brother's crime. Most of all, I hope she realizes that justice isn't about perfection. It's about courage. The courage to do what's right even when it's hard, even when it's costly, even when it's 15 years too late. As for me, I sleep better now. No more secrets, no more lies, no more blood money changing hands in the shadows, just the truth, finally set free. And the knowledge that sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is refuse to carry someone else's shame. The David Chen Patterson Legal Clinic has helped over 200 families get justice for their loved ones. We've recovered millions in wrongful death settlements. We've put corrupt officials in prison. We've given voice to the voiceless. But our most important achievement is simpler. We've proven that truth, no matter how long buried, always finds a way to surface. Even after 15 years, even when powerful people try to keep it hidden, even when the cost seems too high to pay, truth always wins in the end, because truth is the only thing that sets us free.
My brother convinced our whole family I was stealing from Grandma's account, until the bank cameras proved who the real thief was. I should have known something was wrong when my brother started being nice to me. For 23 years, Hayden had made my life miserable. He was the golden child, star athlete, honor roll student, the one who could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. I was the screw-up who dropped out of college and moved back home to help care for Grandma Delilah after her stroke. Grandma was 91 and sharp as ever, but her mobility was limited. I'd moved into her guest room to help with daily tasks. grocery shopping, doctor appointments, managing her medications. She'd wake up at 5 a.m. wanting coffee and would forget she'd already asked me 3 times. Some days she'd insist on wearing her church dress to physical therapy. Other days she'd refuse to eat anything except vanilla wafers. But I loved her fiercely, and she was the only family member who'd never made me feel like a disappointment. The guest room had become my sanctuary. Grandma had let me paint the walls sage green and hang my amateur photography on every surface. She'd bought me a small desk where I worked on freelance graphic design projects. Nothing glamorous, mostly social media posts for local businesses, but it was something. She never made me feel ashamed about my unconventional path. Success isn't about impressing other people, she'd tell me while we watched her afternoon soap operas. It's about being useful to the people who matter. Those words would prove more prophetic than either of us could have imagined. Growing up, Hayden had perfected the art of making me look bad while appearing innocent. In elementary school, he'd break something and hide the evidence in my backpack. When Mom found it, he'd look shocked and suggest maybe I was acting out because I felt overshadowed by his achievements. The pattern continued through high school. Stolen homework, missing money, damaged property. Always with Hayden playing the concerned brother, worried about my troubling behavior. He was brilliant at gaslighting. He'd do something cruel, then convince everyone, including me, that I was overreacting or misremembering what happened. By the time I was a teenager, I'd started doubting my own perceptions of events. The only person who'd ever seen through his act was Grandma Delilah. That boy's got the devil's own tongue, she'd whisper to me during family gatherings. Smooth as silk, but twice as dangerous. You watch yourself around him. I'd dismissed her warnings as the ramblings of an old woman who played favorites. Now I realized she'd been trying to protect me all along. That's when the family meeting started. We need to talk about Mom's finances, Dad announced during Sunday dinner, his voice carrying that familiar tone of disappointment I knew so well. Her account is missing significant amounts. My stomach dropped like I'd been punched. What do you mean missing? Mom pulled out bank statements, her face grim and accusatory. $3,000 in the past 2 months, unauthorized withdrawals, large amounts taken out almost daily. The papers scattered across the dining room table like evidence at a crime scene. Each transaction highlighted in yellow marker, each withdrawal circled in red ink. The dates and times were written in Mom's precise handwriting along the margins. Hayden leaned forward, his expression perfectly concerned, like he'd practiced this moment in front of a mirror. Who has access to her account besides Grandma? All eyes turned to me. The weight of their stares felt crushing. Just me and Grandma, I said quietly, my voice barely audible. And obviously Mom's not taking her own money, Hayden said with fake sympathy that made my skin crawl. She can barely remember what day it is. This is really hard for all of us, but we have to face facts. Dad's voice was ice cold, the same tone he'd used when I'd crashed his car at 17. We trusted you. We let you live there rent-free, gave you responsibility, and this is how you repay us? I tried explaining that I only used her card for groceries and prescriptions, always with receipts that I kept in a shoebox by my bed. But the evidence seemed damning. The withdrawals were happening during times when I was supposedly the only one there, always from the ATM closest to her house, always in amounts just under $200 to avoid triggering fraud alerts. Maybe you have a gambling problem, Mom suggested gently, her voice dripping with false compassion. Or drugs. We can get you help. There's no shame in admitting you need treatment. I'm not stealing from Grandma, I insisted, but my voice sounded weak even to myself. Hayden put his hand on my shoulder, and I wanted to shrug it off violently. The first step is admitting you have a problem. We've all seen the signs, the late nights, the secretive behavior, the way you've been avoiding family gatherings. What late nights? What secretive behavior? I spent most evenings playing Scrabble with Grandma and watching game shows. The only family gatherings I'd missed were ones where Hayden would inevitably make some cutting remark about my life choices. But I could see the doubt spreading across their faces like poison. Every innocent explanation I offered seemed to make me look more guilty. The timing matches perfectly, Uncle Ross pointed out. He'd driven over specifically for this intervention, bringing his wife Penny, who kept shaking her head sadly. The withdrawals started right after you moved in. Because that's when I started helping her with errands, I protested. Of course there would be more activity on her account. $3,000 worth of activity? Aunt Penny asked. For an elderly woman who barely leaves the house? Hayden had prepared for this moment meticulously. He produced a folder containing what he called concerning patterns he'd noticed in my behavior over the past months. He'd documented times when I'd been evasive about my whereabouts, occasions when I'd seemed unusually interested in Grandma's financial affairs, and instances of what he termed defensive behavior when asked innocent questions. I didn't want to say anything before, he said, his voice heavy with regret. But last month, I saw her going through Grandma's purse when she thought no one was looking. This was a complete lie, but it was delivered with such conviction that I saw doubt flicker across Mom's face. I was looking for her reading glasses, I said desperately. She'd asked me to find them. At 2 a.m, Hayden asked gently, when Grandma was asleep? Another lie, but a believable one. The family exchanged glances that said everything. Within a week, they'd moved Grandma to Sunset Manor assisted living facility across town. I wasn't consulted about the decision. I came home from a grocery run to find movers loading her furniture into a truck. Where's Grandma? I asked Mom, panic rising in my throat. We've found her a nice place where she'll be safe, Mom replied without looking at me. Professional caregivers who won't take advantage of her condition. The words hit like a slap. I was banned from visiting without supervision. They changed her bank account and removed my name completely. The family WhatsApp group buzzed constantly with messages about my betrayal, my addiction, my desperate need for intervention. Aunts and uncles I barely spoke to were suddenly experts on my supposed gambling problem. Cousin Miranda sent a long message about how addiction runs in families, and how she'd always worried about my unstable lifestyle. Uncle Ross shared articles about financial elder abuse. Even my teenage cousin posted on Instagram about being disappointed in family members who take advantage of vulnerable people. The social media aspect was particularly brutal. Family friends started treating me differently at the grocery store. Neighbors whispered when I walked by. Hayden had somehow managed to spread the story through our entire social circle without appearing to gossip. He'd simply shared his concerns about my well-being with a few key people, knowing the information would spread like wildfire. I felt completely isolated, like I was drowning in quicksand. Even Grandma seemed to doubt me. "I don't understand," she said during one supervised visit, her cloudy eyes searching my face. "I thought I could trust you. I defended you to everyone. But the evidence, it's so clear." Her voice broke when she said it. This woman who'd raised me during summers, who'd taught me to make her famous apple pie, who'd been my biggest supporter through every failure. She was looking at me like I was a stranger. The supervised visits were humiliating. A nurse would sit in the corner, taking notes on everything we discussed. I couldn't even hug my grandmother without feeling like I was being evaluated for signs of manipulation or coercion. The worst part was watching Hayden comfort everyone. He organized family meetings, researched treatment centers, and spoke eloquently about addiction being a disease that required professional help. He was the perfect concerned brother, stepping up when his family needed him most. "I've been reading about this," he told a room full of relatives during one of his impromptu support groups. "Financial addiction often starts small, borrowing a little here and there, thinking you'll pay it back. But it escalates quickly, especially when someone has access to vulnerable family members." He'd brought printouts from psychology websites and addiction treatment centers. He spoke with authority about intervention techniques and rehabilitation programs. Everyone hung on his every word. "The important thing is that we get help before this destroys our family permanently," he continued. "I know it's painful, but we have to think about protecting Mom first." He'd even created a timeline of my supposed descent into addiction, complete with dates and incidents that painted a picture of progressive moral deterioration. Most of the incidents were fabricated or grossly distorted, but they formed a compelling narrative that explained away any doubts family members might have had. During one particularly painful family meeting, he presented what he called intervention research. He'd contacted 3 different residential treatment facilities and gotten quotes for long-term care. He'd researched my legal options and spoken to a lawyer about conservatorship procedures. "I know this is expensive," he said, his voice choking with emotion, "but I'm willing to contribute significantly to the cost. We can't put a price on family." The manipulation was breathtaking. He was positioning himself as the sacrificial hero while painting me as the villain who'd torn the family apart. That's when I decided to prove my innocence. I spent 3 days at the bank, armed with printed transaction records and a desperate determination to clear my name. The first 2 managers brushed me off. Family disputes weren't their problem. But the third, an older woman named Patricia, actually listened. "You're saying someone else made these withdrawals using your grandmother's card?" she asked, studying my face carefully. "It's the only explanation. I never took that money. I can prove I was nowhere near that ATM on most of these dates." Patricia studied the records with the attention of someone who'd seen similar cases before. "These are all from the same ATM. Do you know our cameras keep footage for 90 days? My heart raced. "Can we check?" Normally we'd need a police report, but she glanced around and lowered her voice. "My own daughter went through something similar. Family members stealing and blaming her. Let me see what I can do." Patricia disappeared for 20 minutes. When she returned, her expression was serious. "I can show you the footage, but if we find evidence of fraud, I'll have to file a report with our security department." "Please," I said. "I just want the truth." An hour later, Patricia called me into a small office with a computer screen. The room smelled like stale coffee and had motivational posters about customer service covering the walls. "These are the timestamps for the disputed transactions," she said, pulling up grainy security footage. "Let's start with the first one." The first video showed the ATM on a Tuesday afternoon. I watched the timestamp crawl forward until 2:47 p.m., the exact time of a $400 withdrawal. A figure approached the machine wearing a dark baseball cap and sunglasses, inserted a card, and made the transaction. It wasn't me. It was Hayden. "Oh my God," I whispered, my hands shaking as I gripped the edge of the desk. Patricia switched to the next transaction. Thursday morning, 11:23 a.m. There he was again, wearing different clothes but clearly recognizable. His distinctive walk, the way he held his shoulders, the expensive watch he always wore, it was unmistakably my brother. Video after video showed the same thing. Hayden, using what had to be a duplicate of Grandma's card, systematically draining her account. He'd been smart about it, varying his clothing, approaching from different angles, keeping his face partially hidden. But he couldn't disguise his build or his mannerisms. "How did he get a duplicate card?" I asked, my voice hollow. Patricia's expression was grim. "He'd need her personal information and PIN. Does he have access to those?" The pieces fell into place like a horrifying jigsaw puzzle. Hayden had helped set up Grandma's online banking last year. He'd insisted on writing down her PIN for emergencies. He'd been the one suggesting she keep her card in the kitchen drawer instead of her purse because it was safer. He'd volunteered to help her with technology, installing banking apps on her phone that saved her login information. He'd been planning this for months, maybe longer. "I need copies of everything," I said, my voice stronger now. Patricia nodded grimly. "I'll also file a fraud report with our security department. This is identity theft and elder abuse." We take this very seriously. She burned the videos onto a disk and printed timestamps for each transaction. The evidence was overwhelming. 17 separate instances of fraud, all clearly showing Hayden's face. Patricia also provided me with additional documentation I hadn't known existed. The bank's fraud detection software had actually flagged several of the transactions as suspicious due to their timing and location patterns. However, since the transactions were under the daily limit and the account holder hadn't reported them, no action had been taken. Your brother was very careful about staying under our automatic fraud triggers, Patricia explained. But the pattern is clear once you know what to look for. Armed with video evidence and fraud documentation, I drove straight to the police station. My hands were still shaking as I walked through the doors, carrying the folder that would either vindicate me or destroy my family forever. The detective, a tired-looking man in his 50s named Morrison, initially seemed skeptical. His desk was covered with case files and empty coffee cups, and he looked like he'd seen every family drama imaginable. Family disputes usually work themselves out, he said without looking up from his computer. Maybe try mediation first. This isn't a dispute, it's theft. I slid the video screenshots across his desk. My brother stole $3,000 from our 91-year-old grandmother and framed me for it. The detective's demeanor changed completely as he reviewed the evidence. He called over another officer, Sergeant Williams, and they spent 20 minutes going through every piece of documentation. This is pretty clear-cut, Morrison said finally. Elder financial abuse, identity theft, fraud. How long has this been going on? The bank says 2 months, but now I'm wondering if it started earlier. He's had access to her information for over a year. Sergeant Williams pulled up Hayden's background information on their computer system. No prior arrests, but let's see what else we can find. They discovered that Hayden had recently applied for several credit cards using Grandma's address. He'd also changed the mailing address for her Social Security payments to a P.O. box he'd rented under a false name. Within an hour, Morrison had opened a formal investigation. They would need to interview all parties and examine Grandma's complete financial records, going back 18 months. We'll need to interview all parties, he said. Don't alert your brother yet. We want to get his initial statement first. The investigation expanded quickly. Detective Morrison contacted the Postal Service about the address changes and discovered Hayden had been intercepting Grandma's mail for months. He'd redirected her Medicare statements, tax documents, and bank correspondence to his P.O. box. They also found evidence that he'd been using her personal information to research reverse mortgage options and life insurance policies. He'd called several financial companies posing as her grandson, helping with estate planning. The scope of his deception was staggering. The next part was the hardest. Waiting. For 3 days, I said nothing while the police built their case. I watched Hayden continue his concerned brother act, organizing another family intervention for my supposed gambling addiction. "We found a really good residential treatment program," he told our parents over dinner. "It's expensive, but we can't put a price on family. I'm willing to help with the costs." The irony was sickening. He was volunteering to pay for my treatment with money he'd stolen from our grandmother. He'd even prepared a speech about how addiction had taken me away from the person I used to be, how he'd noticed changes in my behavior months ago but hadn't wanted to believe it, how the family needed to come together to support me through recovery. "I blame myself," he said, his voice breaking with practiced emotion. "I should have intervened sooner. I should have seen the signs." During one of these performances, he produced a journal he claimed to have been keeping about my concerning behaviors. The entries were dated going back 6 months and described instances of me being secretive about finances, defensive when questioned, and evasive about my daily activities. The journal was entirely fabricated, but it was written in Hayden's careful handwriting and looked authentic. He'd even smudged some entries to make them look older. "I started documenting things because I was worried about bringing accusations without proof," he explained to our parents. But the pattern became undeniable. Mom cried. Dad put his arm around Hayden and praised him for his maturity and compassion. I sat there in silence, knowing that in a few days their entire perception of reality would shatter. The family had started treating me like a dangerous addict. They spoke to me in careful, measured tones, avoided mentioning money in my presence, and watched my movements constantly. Uncle Ross had even suggested they stage a formal intervention with a professional counselor. "We need to be prepared for denial and anger," Hayden told them, referencing pamphlets he'd collected from addiction treatment centers. "The disease makes people manipulative and dishonest." On Friday, Detective Morrison called. "We're ready to make an arrest. Can you gather your family for a meeting? I'd like to present our findings to everyone at once." I called Dad and suggested a family meeting at Grandma's old house. The assisted living facility had let us keep it for another month while they sorted out her belongings. "I want to show you all something important," I said, about the missing money. They arrived expecting another confession, another plea for help. Hayden had brought brochures for treatment centers and a folder of research about addiction recovery. He'd prepared another speech about forgiveness and healing. Instead, they found Detective Morrison waiting in the living room with a laptop and a folder full of evidence. "What's going on?" Hayden asked, but I could see fear flicker behind his eyes for just a moment before the concerned mask slipped back into place. "We've completed our investigation into the missing funds from Mrs. Delilah's account," the detective announced, "and we've identified the perpetrator." He opened his laptop and showed the bank footage. The first video played, Hayden at the ATM, clear as day. The room erupted. "That's impossible," Mom gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Dad just stared at the screen in shock, his face cycling through disbelief, recognition, and horror. Hayden's face went white, but he tried to maintain his composure. "This is some kind of mistake. That's not me. The video quality is terrible. That could be anyone. We have 17 different instances," Detective Morrison continued, playing video after video. all showing the defendant using a duplicated bank card to steal from his grandmother's account. The detective had edited together a compilation that made the evidence undeniable. Different dates, different clothing, but always the same person, always Hayden. Furthermore, Morrison continued, we've discovered that Mr. Rivers has been intercepting his grandmother's mail, redirecting her financial statements, and using her personal information to apply for credit cards and research financial products. He spread out photocopies of credit card applications, postal service change of address forms, and phone records showing calls to various financial institutions. You're lying, Hayden shouted, his careful facade finally cracking. He lunged toward the laptop as if he could somehow delete the evidence. Two officers who'd been waiting outside stepped into the room. Hayden Rivers, you're under arrest for elder financial abuse, identity theft, mail fraud, and conspiracy to commit fraud. As they read him his rights, Hayden's mask slipped completely. He looked directly at me with pure, undiluted hatred. You did this, he snarled. You turned them against me. You've always been jealous, always trying to destroy what I built. No, I said calmly, my voice steadier than I felt. You did this when you decided to steal from our grandmother and frame me for it. But he wasn't done. As the officers cuffed him, he continued his rant. I was protecting her money from you. I was keeping it safe until she really needed it. You would have wasted it all on your pathetic little projects. At least I was going to put it to good use. The delusion was breathtaking. Even caught red-handed, he was trying to paint himself as the hero. I was going to pay it all back with interest, he continued, his voice getting more desperate. I had investments lined up. This was just temporary borrowing. If you hadn't gone to the police like a vindictive little... That's enough, Detective Morrison interrupted. Save it for your lawyer. Mom was crying hysterically. Dad looked like he'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. After they took Hayden away, the room fell silent except for Mom's sobbing. I'm so sorry, Dad finally whispered, his voice barely audible. We should have believed you. We should have investigated before making accusations. How did he get her card information? Mom asked between sobs. I explained everything. How Hayden had volunteered to help with Grandma's banking. How he'd convinced her to write down her PIN. How he'd gradually gained access to all her financial information under the guise of helping her navigate technology. He's been planning this for over a year, I said. The only thing he didn't plan on was getting caught on camera. Detective Morrison had left copies of all the evidence. As we reviewed it together, the full scope of Hayden's manipulation became clear. He hadn't just stolen the money, he'd orchestrated the entire frame job. The timing of his accusations, his sudden concern for family finances, his push to move Grandma to assisted living, it was all designed to isolate me and make me look guilty while he continued stealing. He was going to let you take the blame for everything, Mom said, her voice hollow with realization. The detective's investigation had uncovered even more. Hayden had researched my daily routine, timing the withdrawals for when I was most likely to be at the house. He'd made sure the ATM was close enough to seem plausible, but far enough that I wouldn't accidentally witness the transactions. He'd even planted small seeds of doubt about my character in family conversations for months before the accusations started. Casual comments about my irresponsible lifestyle, my financial struggles, my unpredictable behavior. He'd been setting the stage for my downfall long before the first dollar went missing. We drove to Sunset Manor to tell Grandma the truth. She was in the common room, staring out the window with the same lost expression she'd worn since moving there. When we explained what had really happened, she cried. Not from sadness, but from relief. I knew you wouldn't steal from me, she said, gripping my hand with surprising strength, but the evidence seemed so strong. I started to doubt my own judgment, my own memories. She'd been carrying guilt about doubting me, wondering if her stroke had affected her ability to read people's character. The relief in her eyes was heartbreaking. Can I come home now? She asked. The facility director, who'd overheard our conversation, was professional, but clearly shaken. We've seen cases like this before, she said quietly. Family members using placement as a way to gain control of assets. I'm sorry we didn't catch the red flags. 3 weeks later, Hayden pled guilty to avoid a trial that would have exposed even more of his schemes. His lawyer had advised him that the evidence was overwhelming, and a jury would likely impose a harsher sentence after seeing the full extent of his manipulation. The investigation revealed he'd also been overcharging Grandma for home repairs and pocketing the difference. He'd convinced her to pay for a new roof that cost half what he'd claimed. He'd charged her for plumbing work that was never done. He'd even billed her for landscaping services and pocketed the money while doing the work himself. His entire relationship with our grandmother had been transactional, a long-term con designed to separate her from her money. The prosecution presented evidence that Hayden had been planning to have Grandma declared incompetent so he could gain power of attorney over her finances. He'd already consulted with lawyers about conservatorship procedures and had been documenting what he called her declining mental capacity. His plan was to gradually isolate her from family members who might question his actions, gain legal control of her assets, and then systematically drain her accounts while she was helpless to stop him. He was sentenced to 18 months in prison and ordered to pay full restitution. The judge was particularly harsh in her criticism. Elder abuse is one of the most despicable crimes, she said, her voice echoing through the courtroom. You betrayed the trust of a vulnerable family member and attempted to destroy your sibling's reputation to cover your tracks. This court finds your actions particularly heinous because of the calculated nature of your deception. The judge also ordered him to undergo psychological evaluation and complete courses on elder abuse awareness. He was prohibited from having any contact with elderly family members without supervision upon his release. Hayden never looked at me during the proceedings. Even his lawyer seemed disgusted by the evidence. The local newspaper picked up the story, running a front-page article about elder financial abuse in our community. Hayden's mugshot appeared alongside statistics about family members who steal from elderly relatives. The story mentioned that I had been falsely accused and vindicated by security footage. The public humiliation was devastating for someone who'd built his identity around being the perfect son and community member. After court, our family gathered at Grandma's house, the one she'd decided to move back to immediately after his arrest. "I'm not letting anyone scare me out of my own home again," she declared, settling back into her favorite armchair like she'd never left. The house felt different now, lighter somehow, as if a dark presence had been lifted. Grandma immediately began redecorating, replacing items that reminded her of Hayden's help with new purchases that reflected her own preferences. Dad pulled me aside later that evening. "I know sorry doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know how wrong we were, how wrong I was." "You believed the evidence," I said. "It looked convincing." "No," he shook his head, his eyes red with unshed tears. "We believed him because we wanted to, because it was easier than admitting our golden child was capable of something this evil. We took the easy path instead of asking hard questions." Dad had been particularly devastated by the revelation. He'd built his relationship with Hayden around pride in his son's achievements and moral character. Learning that it was all a facade had shattered his sense of reality. "I keep thinking about all the times he manipulated situations," Dad said. "All the times he made you look bad and I believed him without question. How many years of your life did I waste doubting you because of his lies?" Mom joined us, her eyes still swollen from crying. "Can you forgive us?" "We're family," I said. "We'll figure it out." But forgiveness didn't come immediately. It took months of family therapy, honest conversations, and rebuilt trust. Dad had to confront his favoritism. Mom had to acknowledge how her need to see the best in Hayden had blinded her to red flags. The hardest part was helping them understand that their golden child had never really existed. The Hayden they'd idolized was a carefully constructed facade designed to manipulate their emotions and extract maximum benefit. Family therapy sessions were brutal but necessary. Our counselor, Dr. Martinez, specialized in family trauma and manipulation dynamics. She helped us understand how Hayden had used classic manipulation techniques to control family narratives for years. "Narcissistic family members often create what we call a golden child persona," Dr. Martinez explained. "They present themselves as perfect while systematically undermining other family members to maintain their elevated status." She walked us through examples of Hayden's manipulation going back to our childhood. The broken vase blamed on me, the missing homework that mysteriously appeared in my backpack, the constant subtle undermining of my achievements while highlighting his own. "The goal is to become the family's central figure, the one everyone turns to, trusts, and admires," she continued. "This gives them enormous power to control information and manipulate situations." The therapy helped, but the damage ran deep. Mom struggled with guilt about the years she'd prioritized Hayden's needs over mine. Dad grappled with the realization that his favoritism had enabled Hayden's behavior and hurt me profoundly. "I taught him that he could get away with anything as long as he presented it the right way," Dad admitted during one particularly difficult session. "I rewarded his manipulation without realizing what I was doing." 6 months later, Grandma asked me to move back in with her. Not as a caregiver, but as her roommate and business partner. She'd decided to start a small consulting business, helping other elderly people avoid financial scams. "Who better to help than someone who's seen it all?" she said with a grin. We printed business cards that read, "Delilah's Defense, Protecting Seniors from Financial Predators." She'd give presentations at community centers about warning signs of elder abuse. I'd handle the technology side, website, social media, online resources. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Hayden's attempt to destroy my life had actually led to something better than I'd ever imagined. Our first client was Mrs. Peterson from down the street. Her son had been slowly draining her checking account while promising to invest the money for her retirement. He'd convinced her to sign documents giving him access to her accounts, then systematically transferred money to his own investments. "I trusted him completely," Mrs. Peterson said, tears streaming down her face. "He's my only child. I never thought he'd steal from me." We helped her document the theft and contact authorities. The pattern was eerily similar to Hayden's scheme: gradual access to financial information, manipulation of trust, and systematic theft disguised as helpful financial management. Her son was arrested within a week. Word spread quickly through the senior community. We started getting calls from across the state, elderly people who suspected family members of financial abuse, but didn't know how to prove it or where to turn for help. Grandma thrived in her new role as an advocate. Her sharp mind and no-nonsense attitude made her incredibly effective at spotting scams and manipulative behavior. "I won't let what happened to me happen to anyone else," she'd tell our clients. "These predators count on us being too embarrassed or confused to fight back." Our second client was Mr. Richardson, whose daughter-in-law had been forging his signature on checks and withdrawing money from his savings account. She'd convinced him that he was becoming forgetful and needed her help managing his finances. "She'd show me bank statements that didn't match my records," he explained. "When I questioned the discrepancies, she'd say I was confused because of my age. Eventually, I started believing her." The psychological manipulation was as damaging as the financial theft. These predators didn't just steal money. They stole their victims' confidence in their own mental abilities. Our third case involved a grandmother whose grandson had convinced her to take out a reverse mortgage to help him start a business. He'd pocketed the money and disappeared, leaving her homeless and financially devastated. Each case we handled revealed new tactics that financial predators used against elderly family members. We began documenting these patterns and sharing information with law enforcement and social services. Within a year, we'd helped prosecute 12 cases of elder financial abuse. Our success rate caught the attention of the state attorney general's office, which invited us to participate in a task force on elder protection. Grandma became a minor celebrity in senior advocacy circles. She testified before the state legislature about the need for stronger elder abuse protections and appeared on local news programs to educate seniors about warning signs of financial exploitation. The best defense is education, she'd say during interviews. When seniors know what to look for, predators can't take advantage of them. Meanwhile, reports from prison indicated that Hayden was struggling with incarceration. He'd been placed in protective custody after other inmates learned about his crimes against an elderly family member. Apparently, even criminals have standards when it comes to elder abuse. His cellmate told prison officials that Hayden spent most of his time writing letters, not to family members but to lawyers and journalists, trying to convince them that he'd been wrongfully convicted. He claimed the bank videos were doctored and that I had somehow orchestrated an elaborate frame job. The delusion was complete. Even in prison, facing the consequences of his actions, he couldn't accept responsibility for what he'd done. Last week, I got a letter from Hayden in prison. It was 3 pages of self-pity and blame, how the family had driven him to steal, how I'd ruined his life by pressing charges, how everyone would see the truth eventually. He claimed he'd been planning to pay the money back once his investments matured. He said he'd only framed me to protect the family from embarrassment while he sorted out the financial situation. He insisted that if I'd just talked to him privately instead of involving the police, everything could have been resolved quietly. The letter was full of phrases like, "if you really cared about family," and "your vindictive nature has destroyed everything." Even from prison, he was still trying to manipulate the narrative. He wrote about how difficult prison was for someone falsely accused, and how the other inmates treated him poorly because they didn't understand the complex family dynamics that had led to his situation. "I'm surrounded by real criminals," he wrote. "People who actually intended to hurt others. I was trying to help the family even if my methods were unconventional." The letter ended with a request for money for commissary items and books, along with a veiled threat about what he might do when he was released if the family didn't support him during his incarceration. I threw it away without finishing it, but not before showing it to Dr. Martinez during our family therapy session. "Classic manipulation," she said after reading excerpts. "He's trying to maintain control even from prison. The threats, the guilt trips, the attempts to rewrite history, it's all textbook narcissistic behavior. Some people never learn, but the rest of us do. Mom and Dad visit regularly now, and our relationship is stronger than it's ever been. They've had to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves and their parenting, but that honesty has brought us closer together." Uncle Ross and Aunt Penny publicly apologized for their accusations and donated money to our anti-fraud business. Cousin Miranda deleted her Instagram post and wrote a long apology message about jumping to conclusions. The family WhatsApp group now shares articles about financial literacy and elder protection instead of gossip and accusations. Dr. Martinez helped us understand that healing from family manipulation takes time. There are still moments when old patterns resurface, when Dad automatically takes Hayden's side before catching himself, or when Mom makes excuses for behavior that hurt me. But the difference now is awareness. We recognize these patterns and address them directly instead of pretending they don't exist. The local community has also been transformed by our experience. The Senior Center now offers monthly workshops on financial protection. The police department created a specialized elder abuse unit. Local banks implemented additional security measures for elderly customers. Our story became a case study in how financial predators operate within families and how communities can work together to protect vulnerable members. Grandma's advocacy work has expanded beyond individual cases. She now consults with banks, law enforcement agencies, and social service organizations about identifying and preventing elder financial abuse. "The predators are getting smarter," she tells audiences during her presentations. But so are we. Knowledge is our best weapon against these criminals. These days, when someone's story seems too convenient, when the evidence points a little too neatly in one direction, I remember those bank cameras. Sometimes the truth is hiding in plain sight. You just have to know where to look. And sometimes the person you trust most is the one you should watch most carefully. The business has grown beyond our wildest expectations. We now have 3 part-time employees and a waiting list of clients. We've helped recover over $200,000 in stolen funds and prevented countless additional thefts through education and early intervention. Grandma jokes that Hayden inadvertently gave her the best retirement career she could have imagined. "He thought he was destroying our lives," she says. "Instead, he gave us a purpose we never knew we needed." Last month, we received a commendation from the governor for our work in elder protection. Grandma insisted on accepting the award wearing the same dress she'd worn to Hayden's sentencing, a small act of defiance that made us both smile. The irony of the situation still amazes me. Hayden's attempt to manipulate and control our family ultimately led to his own downfall and created something beautiful from the wreckage of his deception. Sometimes justice comes in unexpected forms. Sometimes the very tools predators use to harm others become the instruments of their own destruction. And sometimes the family member everyone thinks is the problem turns out to be the solution everyone needed.